Welcome to the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm Jen Sproul, CEO of the Institute of Internal Communication. Since we launched this series in 2021, the world of work has been disrupted by event after event. A pandemic, geopolitics, AI, extreme weather events, remote and hybrid working, generational shifts, inclusion, diversity. The entire nature of how we work needs transformation. This podcast explores opportunities for internal communication in the future of work. Internal comms is a critical function that helps organisations achieve lasting change, building trust and relationship between people in pursuit of shared goals. Please join me, Dominic Walters, and Kat Barnard as we dissect what this means for internal communication. With relentless change the new normal, it's time to reimagine our profession.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm Dominic Walters and joined as ever by my two co-hosts, Kat Barnard and Jem Sproul. And today we're delighted to have with us Amraze Khan. We met Amraze October 2024 when he was one of a great panel of people talking about, I guess, the whole area about inclusion at the conference, one-day conference last year in Manchester. Amraze is the head of EDI. Now, we had a debate about that. ED&I is equality, diversity and inclusion. We'll come back to those words in a moment. At Manchester Met University, where he's responsible for the vision around supporting inclusion amongst the university's 4,500 staff and around 40,000 students, so a huge body of people. Amraze has a great background for doing this. He's worked in EDI for nearly a decade with experience in senior leadership roles across various industries, including the NHS, within charities and local government. Prior to that, he worked in senior communication roles in the NHS and civil service. So obviously has a good insight into some of the communication issues around inclusion. Outside of that, Amraze is a proud Yorkshireman, possibly working on the wrong side of the Pennines, and we'll have to come on to that. A carer, a father to two cats, and a trustee at Rochdale Mind, as well as being a blogger and a podcast. Amraze, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It feels like that was a splendid opening, so thank you.
Well, it'd be great to start with what we talked about earlier, about this whole idea about labels and names, because we know that EDI has become something that's been under scrutiny for certainly the last 12 months, and people have been challenging it, and whether it's worthwhile, whether it's a good investment, whether it's the right thing to be doing. But I guess it'd be good just to delve into some of those words, because we know that in everything we try and do as communicators, it's about establishing some sort of shared meaning. We also know it's important to have conversation. And often that's difficult because people take exception to certain words and certain ways of describing things. So it'd be good just to go back over this variance between equality and equity, because it may sound a small difference, but what do you see as the difference to those two words?
I think language is very important when it comes to equality, diversity and inclusion. Every organisation will name this area slightly differently. And I think the main point for me is fairness at the core of everything that we do. So equality is the common term that's been used for many organisations, many industries and areas. And in my view, equality is very much treating everybody the same. We're going to give you all the same things and we want you to flourish. So the often example we use in our training here at MMU is things like, we're going to give you all a desk and we want you to get on with work and off you go. But there's people in our workforce, in our local population, who have diverse needs. There could be somebody who's neurodiverse, who has a disability, or a number of different things, and they may need specific support. So equity is more about understanding that person's need and ensuring we give them what they exactly require so they can flourish. And many people may have seen, there's a diagram often used by EDI practitioners of the football pitch and people looking over a fence. And you'll see in the first picture, they all get given the same box, but that doesn't tackle the inequity that's existing in that picture. But then in the second picture, they all get given a box for their needs. And then you see everyone's got fair access to whatever that might be. So it's something to really consider and think about.
And I guess as you're describing, Amraze, equality, it's more straightforward to understand. Equity is harder. And I love the example you gave there. But it must mean, therefore, that to establish equity, we have to have detailed conversations. We talk a lot about listening as communicators. And I guess in order to be equitable in our approach, we need to have conversations, understand what people are needing, what their thoughts are. Whereas if we do everything equally, that should be easier to do, in inverted commas. What's your experience of that and having conversations and that sort of thing?
I manage a really diverse team here at Manchester Met. with a very diverse, again, population of students and staff. And it's always about those really meaningful, honest conversations where you can sit down and find out a bit more. Because sometimes, as human beings, we have fear. We might be scared to declare or share something with somebody because there's a lot of myths around that. And people often say to me, well, if I don't know that about my team member, how am I meant to embed EDI? How am I meant to do it? I'm not a psychic. And I say, I get that, absolutely. But you create a culture where people may, if they want to share their information, they can. And you have those meaningful conversations. You check in on the well-being of your staff member. You ask them what you can do. So there's meaningful conversations, but then also being a role model. So you're sharing those values and experiences in what you're doing so people can see it as the norm. So it creates a really good culture. And I think the other part of it for me is the representation. So as communicators, when you're doing your communications, are you using inclusive language? Are you thinking about representation in your images? Whether that's on the website, social media, is it representative of your local population? So really thinking about those things, because they might be really small things, but they can make a huge difference.
From your experience of doing that, Amraze, how can you help people, communicators and other people, show that inclusivity is important to the organisation, is mission critical? Because we mentioned earlier, we know that the whole idea of EDI has been put under the microscope, has been scrutinised. And I guess in some organisations, people have used that, or leaders have used that as an excuse to say, well, we won't invest in that. So it'd be interesting to get a flavour from you as to your experience of helping show that inclusivity is a mission-critical issue, why it affects organisations positively.
And to be honest, Dom, these past 12 months, 2 years have been really difficult. And not just for myself, we see things happening over the pond in the US and colleagues out there and what's happening. So it's difficult, it's challenging, and often having an impact on your own well-being because you want to do a really good job. And in terms of mission critical, I think it's more than just a moral imperative. It's a strategic one. The world that we live in is complex, the disruption, diversity is the norm, and organisations and societies that fail to embrace inclusivity, I think really fall the risk of being left behind, economically, socially, but I also think culturally as well. Someone once said to me, we have such a diverse population in the UK. What if the cure to cancer is in the mind of someone diverse? And what if that never gets harnessed? Thinking about that and really understanding that there is more. Obviously, the moral compass, the human rights aspect is key. But then we also think about business performance. Companies in the top quartile of ethnic and gender diversity, from reports that you see from a number of think tanks, often outperform those in the bottom quartile in profitability and innovation, for example. You get a better decision making because you've got more diversity. You've got a company that's working in an area of real diverse areas, but you're not listening to the lived experience of your local people. How are you going to make sure services are fit for purpose? So it's like really thinking about that talent retention piece, the well-being piece, and all these areas work together to create a culture of belonging. So ultimately, you're an employer of choice. You put out a job ad and you get maybe 300 people applying because everybody wants to work for you, and you create a really good environment. And ultimately, I'm a firm believer, if you care for your staff, they will care and have better support for your customers, your students, your service users. So it all really links together.
I'll pass over in a second, but it's really interesting you say that. So yes, of course, it's a good thing to be doing. It's a fair thing to be doing. What I really like what you said is, not my words, but if you don't open up to everybody, then you're cutting down on the amount of interaction you're having. You're cutting down on the innovation you might open up, and you're cutting back on your understanding of the marketplace you might be in. So it is definitely a commercial handicap, if you like, not to do it. So thank you for clarifying that.
For me, I think this is such a key point, and I'm struggling to remember exactly how he set this out. But I read the most recent book by an organizational psychologist called Thomas Chimero-Premuzic. And the book is called I, Human. And it's a short-ish book, a couple of 100 pages, but it really sets out the opportunity for human beings in the AI age. And one of the things that he pointed out, which I'd not thought about before, but it makes total sense and it plays exactly to this point that you've raised, Amraze. Algorithms are computer rules. If this, then that. If this, then that. So algorithms don't like outliers. They don't like diversity. They don't like anything that can't be put in this bucket of normality or this bucket of normality. And it's not efficient, is it, to have endless buckets, endless norms. So there is this ongoing endeavour to push people towards the mass middle. And if you think about how Netflix operates or how Spotify operates, if you listen to a playlist or you watch a film, what happens at the end is that the algorithm says, oh, well, if you like this, you might like that. If you like this, you might like that. And over time, that breeds, I can't think of the right word. It's not hegemony, is it? It's big blobby blobs of normality. Whereas in nature, every single one of us, even though there are however many billion of us as Homo sapiens on the planet, we are all different. We cannot be the same. We cannot be the same. And the other thing it makes me think about a little bit is pedigree animals. The more pedigree they are, the more health issues they've got, because narrow band thinking creates friction points. So this piece around the impacts of a lack of diversity on organisational performance is really, really key to me, because we're in uncharted territory. Nobody knows what tomorrow is going to bring, let alone next week, next month, next year. And we need as many people thinking about business risk mitigation or innovation or sustainability or competitive edge. We need as many people within the organisation fully committed to those things. Do you have any examples of where you've seen a lack of diversity impact organisational performance, Amraze? What have you seen as being kind of jarring?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Kat, actually, and happy to give an example just from a personal lived experience. A 5-year-old Amraze was living with a single mum and going to doctor surgeries, going around places and not seeing any diversity, not seeing myself represented. And it really made me think, well, is there any point in this world? Will I achieve anything in this world? I can't see myself represented. What is that about? Is that something wrong with me? And it took quite a long period of time to figure out it's nothing wrong with me. The systems, the institutions out there need to change. And that was really difficult to understand. But you see things, so my background, a lot of it is in the NHS, for example, and I've seen stories, heard stories whereby staff members are very diverse, but at senior levels, there is no diversity. Visible diversity, if I'm talking about so race and ethnicity, for example. And decisions are being made for patients, but service users, and there's a lack of understanding of different cultures. So, for example, I've got friends who use mental health services, and they come from an Asian community background. And I know this is not just within our community. Many communities, mental health is a stigma and it's a taboo. You shouldn't talk about it, which I completely disagree with, just to be very clear. But when they've gone to services and access services, they're being told, well, actually, just have a therapy session, get a sick note, and you can go back to work. So there's a lack of understanding of that culture. And I think that then has an issue on performance, staff performance, ability to provide the right level of care for different needs of the population. And you see trusts out there who are not performing well in terms of monetary, financial performance. Many trusts are merging together. And I know there's a whole host of other reasons behind that as well. But you think to yourself, if you had a more diverse board, you were thinking about things better, you were providing better care, ultimately that could reduce the wait times. That could make sure we have better fit for purpose services, that everybody's mum, dad, granddad, friend, uncle gets the right service for them. And there's stories you might have heard of in the press about Mid Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust, the Francis inquiry that happened back in 2011-12, where there was a lack of diversity, lack of compassionate leadership, and that led to a whole host of poor care being delivered to patients, people not drinking water out of vases, for example.
Yeah.
And there's a whole host of issues there. We see that with commercial organisations as well. And those problems exist and we need to tackle them. And we need to make sure that we're providing better support for our diverse communities. The university, we've got around 40% of Black, Asian, minority ethnic students. we need to understand their needs. We need to make sure they're supported when they come to university. They get the best experience.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thinking to do there.
Yeah. And that lived experience, that lack of panoramic thinking. So it feels to me where we're at today, board level diversity across public, private and third sector, that isn't diverse enough. Caroline Criado Perez wrote an entire book called Invisible Women. When we were planning how we might approach this topic prior to coming on air, we said, didn't we? Oh my goodness, there's so many elements to discuss, but even gender equality is so far out of kilter, and things like car seatbelt safety, the crash test dummies that were designed for car seatbelt safety were proportionate to the typical male dimensions, not female dimensions. And did we have another conversation quite recently on the podcast where somebody was talking about supporting the fire service, and equipment had been put in a place within a fire station attached to the wall, perfectly accessible for your communal garden average sized man, but completely inaccessible for a female firefighter. And it's all of these small things. How can you serve any community if your mental capacity isn't representative of those communities?
Exactly. And similarly, we see things with ADHD and autism. I am waiting for a diagnosis for ADHD at the minute, but I know it was often seen, I'm not saying this is the right way of thinking, that ADHD was a child issue for young boys because they were really loud and had lots of energy, and it was predominantly white young boys. But it can be females, it can be people from different backgrounds and walks of life, and those stereotypes create problems for today. We see a lot of people who get diagnosis say, oh my God, things make sense in my life right now, because it was missed at the younger ages, or people get diagnosed very late in life at a very elderly age. And it matters. Getting out of that narrow thinking and bridging those gaps makes a world of difference for people out there.
I'm just listening, and there's so much. I'm just sort of nodding along as you're talking. Nodding. I like to do that. And I think there's a couple of things as you're talking that strike me as well. And I think it picks up a little bit on what Kat was saying as well, is that I feel like we're in a world at the moment where there's such short-termism. As in, I need to win an election or a poll or show I'm making an impact in 5 months, when the problems are far more systemic, or they need far greater listening and understanding and community building. But no one's got the patience to do that. They just want to get to a results-driven place. But actually what they're doing is not giving results, because actually the power is in the listening and the knowledge of those that are out there, and how we can bring that. And I, as you said it earlier, is like that person that could cure cancer might feel like they can't get on the working ladder. It worries me how much, well, I think particularly in the UK, our economy is based on intelligence and knowledge, by and large. There's knowledge out there that we as an economic country are not capitalising on to move things forward. And we're trying to get to things too quickly and I feel rhetoric and language has become such a tool to win or lose against, rather than a tool for good when it should be. That's my sort of ramblings of reflection. But I think where it leads me to is thinking then to communication and the work that you're particularly doing at Manchester Met, and also then for our listeners, as well as grappling with this language landscape, short-termism response to what's going on around us. And I do believe our professional community wants to do these good things, but they're probably being pushed back by, we need results now. What do you think happens when people do feel excluded from work? How can we, I guess, push back on that and show these are the worst things? This is the risk to your business or to you or to your organization when people feel excluded at work. My secondary question, you can take this in two parts, is how are you navigating the language of that at the moment in your practice and in your work? Because it feels like you can't quite say or do the right thing.
It's some very good reflections and points there, Jen. The language piece, I think as an EDI professional, it gets more and more scarier. People often think I know the answers to everything and I can never get it wrong. And it's trying to educate people that I will get it wrong as well. I don't know everything. As far as I'm aware, I'm not a robot, I'm a human being. And just being really honest with that and saying it's okay to get it wrong, but I'm happy to be checked in. I'm happy for you to share something with me, and vice versa. Be happy if I share something with you, and let's learn. For me, so often I hear stories where people are getting told off and blamed and wagging, pointing fingers. That for me in EDI doesn't work. If you scare people like that, often critics of EDI, which we know exist, that can spark a whole range of debates out there. It can also mean that people are not willing to learn anymore. We're human beings. We get defensive. We have our backs up. And that was something that I had to really learn early on in my career. I was one of those people that was like, well, let's do it right now. Let's fix the problem. Let's do it, as you've just said. And I very quickly learned that if I carried on with that pace and that view, although good intentions behind it, I was losing people along the journey. And for me, EDI is bringing people with you. It's hearts and minds. Often people might say it's a bit fluffy, but it is about people at the centre and the core of it. So about bringing people with you, listening, understanding, and really making sure that you're influencing, engaging, and educating people. So language does matter. What I would say to your listeners is, don't worry about getting it wrong, but be okay for someone to set you right and take learnings from that, which I think is hugely important. On the element of exclusion, and it is, again, talking from lived experience, at times at work, not in my current role, previous roles, in general in society, I've often always felt like a bit of the odd one out, to be honest. The one that doesn't fit in this community, I know I've spoken to Kat offline, and she can probably vouch for how interesting I am in terms of my personality and who I am. People don't always like that sometimes, and you can feel like you're not being included in conversations. I see and hear in my experience that a lot of the board level decisions are made outside of the boardroom, perhaps when people are going for a drink or seeing a friend or building those relationships and networks. And if you're not included in that, you're not going to progress, or you're not going to get the best, more budgets of money or whatever else it might be. You won't get those opportunities. And that can be quite difficult because you feel as though you're not valued. You feel demotivated. You feel, what's the point of me doing all this work if no one's going to see me, hear me? And it can be really soul destroying for your mental health, for team dynamics. And even ultimately, as I said before, if your team is not engaged or not feeling like they belong, then the overall outcome, going back to that commercialization point, is going to be poor. Retention is going to be poor. Nobody will want to work for you. So you're going to see a whole host of problems when it comes to inclusion from that perspective. But also, if you think more wider, I think I mentioned earlier about the cancer example, you're not going to get real good ideas and new ways of thinking because you're not including people. Why would somebody want to come and share their great ideas with you if you're just ignoring them and not bringing them in as part of the conversation? And sometimes, yeah, I know organisations have budgets, finances, resources, everything's finite in the world at the minute. Does it mean that you listen to an idea that's guaranteed to go forward? Sometimes the listening bit is the most important. And you can say to the person, we can't do A, but we could do B and C. Or we can't do this idea. Have you got another thought that we could do? And that's really empowering for people, because just being listened to sometimes and having your voice heard means more than anything else. We have our staff networks here at the university, trade union colleagues. You work with them quite collaboratively. They've got fantastic ideas. Obviously, we can't do everything sometimes. Organisations can't. But we listen. We listen to understand and listen with the willingness that if we can't do it this year, maybe we can do it next year. And that's really helpful. And ultimately, I think with strategies, plans, approaches that you develop, you do that collaboratively with people. You have to. I cannot develop a program, management leadership program for somebody who identifies as a woman because I don't have that lived experience. How am I going to make that program right for that person? And we talk a lot about the word privilege. I think sometimes can be a bit of a dirty word and people get scared. And I've had it. I've had all sorts of conversations with people and it's fine. We're human, as I say. But I'd like to spin that to absence of experience. If I've got an absence of experience in something, how on earth am I going to bridge that knowledge if I don't include those people in that conversation? How on earth am I going to make sure something is right? I don't have any experience of being a trans person, a non-binary person. I'm not going to be able to do it. There is no harm in saying that I want to learn to be better, because every day is a learning day. So be prepared to listen, be prepared to be open and honest and collaborate, because that's when you're going to get the best outcomes with trust, creativity and resilience.
I love that. And I think it is so important. And I think another thing as well was I'm hearing you talk, and the things I'm thinking about in terms of the internal communication practitioner as well, is that we're so caught in being fast that we're not caught in being good at what we're doing or doing the right thing. We're trying to be too quick. So we miss things, I think, because we're not giving it that space. And so I wonder so much sometimes with communicators, we're often perhaps tasked that don't, as you say, have the lived experience. I don't have the lived experience of many. I only have mine, which is my very small, tiny frame of reference. But what you're doing is you're asking those individuals at pace without that time and space to create communications, initiatives, programs that are supposed to resonate with I hope, diverse group of people. We're all individual needs, but we're not having the time to test that with others to see how it lands before we go ahead and say it's the right thing. So therefore we end in this, how can we breathe in that space? Do you ever find that can be a really useful resource? Perhaps you talked about your forums and your resource groups is kind of going, well, this is what we're thinking about doing, but let me play that out with these kinds of people and have that honest conversation. So we can test and refine. And I think getting things wrong is okay. And I worry that we don't allow people to get things wrong. And that's a real problem.
I just wanted to mirror that because as Amraze was talking and then you said, Jen, about being fast, I think we overlook the extent to which we live in what I would call a late stage capitalism, culture of perfectionism. We live in the illusion, in the bubble of belief that we have to get it right first time. I just want to say this because I feel slightly embarrassed earlier when I was just struggling to find my words, but you've given me permission, Amraze, to say, no, I was wrong. Hegemony, nothing to do with the word that I wanted to use. Homogeny, just park that. But this culture of perfectionism as well, none of us can afford that.
Well, how can you be perfect at pace?
Exactly that.
You can't be. You can't be perfect at pace. You have to have an iterative process and you have to have sources and places and people that feel that their view is welcomed, that their view is informed, that their opinion matters to work that through in a continuous way.
And nobody's perfect, right? None of us are perfect. In nature, as biological creatures, we aren't symmetrical. We aren't identical. We are beautifully unique and idiosyncratic, and we've all got foibles and unique characteristics. And oh my God, I mean, the Stepford Wives as a film, would we want to be all the same as everybody else? I mean, the thought of that makes me feel quite queasy. So how have we ended up in a place where we can make great iconic films about the tragedy of sameness and yet in parallel somehow manifest workplaces that don't encourage diversity, that encourage that homogeny and sameness? It's just so bizarre when you actually break it down. It's so odd, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think my question back to you, Maria, on that is, I don't know if you've got any examples or ways of working, but I think you talked as well about the work that you're doing with management and leadership, I think, because I think that's unlocking that behaviour or anything like that, or in the groups that you work, to have that iterative collaborative process. Just to give our listeners, I guess, a flavour of what that might look like in practice. Do you have any sort of examples of how you're tackling that?
Absolutely. And I think for us, it's a lot about embedding the EDI practice as a whole. That will take time. That's not going to happen overnight. And that's where the bit of getting it wrong is actually okay, because you'll get it right next time. So let's not dwell on what we've done. Let's look at being better as we go into the future. I think is hugely important in terms of that. We do a lot of collaborative, as you say, engagement and work with staff networks and groups and also communities. So we have a community engagement function within the university. So it works quite closely with local communities, MPs, politicians, etc., and key stakeholders externally as well. Now, what we always want to do is you come up with an idea and you might think this idea is the best idea since sliced bread. It's going to sort everything out. In your head, you might. And then you have to go and play it out. We've done a lot of work in the university, for example, to develop something for carers. We've looked at having specific programs with specific characteristics, which I know many organisations do as well. We've got reciprocal mentoring, respect at work advisors, etc. Quite a lot of initiatives. And you plan out what you think is right, what you think is going to work. But it may not work for everybody. So you have to go and do some engagement. You go and talk to people and you need to have a thick skin to listen to the feedback. Feedback is a gift. You sometimes might say that with gritted teeth and sometimes you might want to return the feedback. We're human, I get it. But what I don't know. Where the gaps are in my knowledge, I'm never going to understand. So I'm going to have to speak to people. I'm going to figure out from their perspective how things work. Because we also have to understand that people who are diverse, whether that's disability, race, ethnicity, gender, across characteristics, everyone within those communities are different as well. Everyone is not the same. So you have to do some engagement. You have to talk to them. And sometimes you might get contradictory views. That's okay. Let's listen. Let's figure out what can we do? How can it work? Carers Passport, we went and spoke to carers, but we also spoke to wider communities because we recognise you might be a carer, but you might also be from another protected characteristic. You might be someone who identifies as female carer. You might be somebody who's looking after the parents, slightly older, and a carer. There's a whole host of wider breadth that you've got to look at in terms of making sure that you're doing the right thing for those people and not just look at it from a narrow tunnel vision, because that's not going to help you achieve everything. We also do things like equality impact assessments. It's something we're looking at. I'm not saying we're perfect as an organisation. We've got work to do, but really sitting down with our peers, our colleagues, our policymakers and going, so you're thinking of doing this. Tell me more about that. So how is that going to impact someone who identifies as a female? Flexible working policy. How is that going to work for everybody? How are we going to make sure it's fair for people who are part-time? All those different areas. And people often go to me, they'll send you an EIA, quality impact assessment, and they'll say positive, because they're really scared. And I'm like, hold on a second, let's sit down. Probably negative there, probably neutral. They go, I don't want negative on the list. What we're going to do? I'm like, it's okay. What's the mitigation we're going to put in place? So we really understand it in a bit more detail. But collaboration, I know we talk about it a lot in workplaces, collaboration. It really is key about bringing people together and really fostering that culture. And making sure we create the right approaches for people.
I love that, Amraze, and I think I'm going to pass over to Dom in a sec, but I think that is absolutely where we sit and where we need to go with this. And I think there's also as well, that kind of collaboration only comes in a human-to-human capacity. I think that's a really important thing to note, that is where those things were changing. And I think in a world, particularly where policy, I think, is a word, can feel really like I'm just keeping you away from something or I'm instructing something. If we do everything with a view of policy rather than with humanity, and how can those blend together, is really important, because without getting into the politicals of things, there are policy and regulatory things that have changed and are changing in the future that organisations, I think, will have a challenge as whether that gets held down now to implement in practice. And that point of fairness is really important. So I love that. But Dom, shall I throw the baton back to you?
Thank you. Yeah, baton court. I guess to mix metaphors, we ought to use that baton to come into land. Right? We've learned a lot, I think, and it shows not just your background in EDI, Amraze, but also as a communicator. There's so much we can take from this. Not least, of course, the definition of the word homogeneity. I can't even say it. Homogeny. Although, Kat, I did note at the time you then said that homogeny is a big blobby blob of humanity, which is a far better description, I think. And it probably describes much what it is.
I think I might be riffing off our prior conversation to coming on air about a certain politician, but let's just park that.
We won't go into that.
I said hegemony, and I've looked hegemony up, and it has nothing to do with what I was talking about. The word I wanted was homogeny. So any listeners who were sat there scratching their head or thinking, well, she didn't get that right, I went and did my homework.
Well, in fairness, I think hegemony, doesn't that mean power concentrated in a small group of people?
Yes.
So it does reflect some of the things we've been talking about, some of the things we're trying to break open, I think, as well. So there is a connection there.
Tenuously, but thank you for that gift, Dom. That was lovely of you.
Amraze, we've been talking about how communicators can help build more inclusive and fairer work cultures, I guess. And I think one of the things that have come through very strongly in the conversation we've been having in previous podcasts and with communicators as an institute is that communicators in the future need to more than ever demonstrate how they help organizations perform better. And I think you've made the connection very clearly that establishing a fair and inclusive work culture is good for many reasons, but one of them is it helps organizations perform better. It's a no-brainer not to do it because it just closes off doors you don't need to close, I think. And I think you've also highlighted to us some of the ways that communicators can do that. You've spoken about language. We know that language can be incredibly important. And you've highlighted the issue, I think, which one of the reasons why things get polarized so quickly is people fear they're going to say something wrong. And I think what you were saying was that's okay, provided there's no intent behind it, obviously, but that's okay. You talked about consultation. You talked about conversation, I think, which is all important. And I love the fact that you were also discussing seeing things from other people's point of view. And the one of many nuggets I'm going to really take from this is your reframing of privilege. Because I think you said privilege is more about absence of experience, and that's fantastic. Because as you said, privilege is such a loaded word, and it can offend people, it can be used to hit people. So that was really good. So there's lots of stuff there. It'd be great to get your take as both a communicator and someone who's driving for greater fairness and justice and inclusion. What do you think internal communicators should be doing to build better inclusivity in their work cultures? It's a massive question.
I know, and I've not got long to answer it either. I think internal communications is pivotal. It's not just about memos and meetings. It's the heartbeat of an inclusive culture. And when it's done properly, it transforms workplaces from silos into real communities. And that is what we need to achieve. So it's a core function. I think sometimes in some organizations, people, they just think, oh, it's just a newsletter that's going to go out. It's a lot more than that. I've seen that working in really high performing communications teams and internal comms functions as well. I think some of the areas you touched on, it amplifies diverse voices. So I think we said before, sometimes you have to work at pace and things happen and things don't go right and wrong. Take learnings from that in terms of next time, what can you do? How can you bridge that absence of experience when you're doing that approach, article, content, comms? How can you embed EDI in everything that you do? What is your own understanding of EDI? There's legal requirements all organizations have to do, but it's a lot more than that. If we just said it was legal, let's be honest, that can be quite difficult to understand sometimes, challenging in the world we live in, as Jen touched on earlier. But let's make it about the human being. Let's make it about your partner, your son, your daughter, your cousin, your auntie, your uncle, your relative, because we all benefit from it. So how are we talking to those people? How are we sharing information with them for them to understand? Our language, things have changed, times have changed. I'd like to think in the world that we live in, we have a really good generation of young people coming forward who are really open to understanding and learning. Learn from them, learn with them. We are all responsible for our own education and learning. We talk about the absence of experience. We do this exercise in one of our training sessions where we ask people, how many of your friends are from this group or this characteristic? People look at me and I go, just reflect on that. And I'm not saying go out and find the first gay person to be your best friend or the first person who identifies as a woman, but know where your gaps are. Know where you need to improve on your knowledge. Where can you get to bridge some of that absence of experience? Because the world we live in, it depends on what we've seen out there, what we've been doing. For example, 20 years ago, Little Britain was probably a really great show. Everyone used to laugh at it and the things that were happening. But now we look back with embarrassment and horror and we think, what did we do? But in that time, that's what was going on. And if you're surrounded by things, different things in the world, views, opinions, shows, books, you have a certain mind frame. So how can you challenge yourself and how can you reflect on what you're doing in terms of making things better, in terms of improving? And I think ultimately, as I said before, don't worry about getting it wrong. Keep trying your best, be open to insight, conversations, feedback, and look at what you can do to make it right for the next time. Does that help, Dom?
It helps immensely, Amraze. And my last question, which is the key one really, is how do you cope as a Yorkshireman in Lancashire?
Oh, what a question. It's interesting. Things are slightly different on the side of the pond. There's no Yorkshire tea around whenever I might need a cup of tea. So it's always popping out to the local bars and clubs and enjoying the shopping life of the north. But I do love it. I feel like I'm an adopted Mancunian and I wouldn't have it any other way.
And that's a great answer. Amraze, thank you very much. As communicators and as individuals and humans, we've got so much we can take from this. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amraze.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Kat.
Thanks for listening today. If you like what you've heard, please like and follow us wherever you access your podcasts.